Again, the rough draft merely needs to work. It does not need to do everything you plan to do. So it's, yeah. Sorry about that. So today, right, we have all of the many flaws in RSA. So this is hopefully the last lecture on RSA, because I think we're probably all getting a little bored of it. Right, so RSA, I mean, just as a reminder, that's how you do RSA. Now, the weird part about RSA, you give away the product of these two primes. So you're really hoping, right, and then, you know, they can recompute the private key from the public key if they know the two primes, right? So they can, this is Euler's totient function. And it's, so the obvious first, I mean, means of attack on RSA is factoring. And it turns out factoring back, you know, when they first came out with RSA was not quite as advanced, right? That they're really pretty darn good factoring algorithms nowadays. So you kind of have to, yeah, in fact, in the homework, there's, you can do it this way or a couple other approaches, but basically, if this is small enough that you can find the primes by just like searching numbers. So how do you do factoring? I give you a number n that's the product of two things. You want to find them. Well, you just try different stuff. And I claim, there's this interesting argument that says, like, if I got a number up here, right, I can start from 1 and just try everything up to the number. But, like, n minus 1 is not going to divide n evenly, guaranteed, right? In fact, n over 2 would be an obvious place to stop because, hey, the only possibility is going to be like n over 2 times 2 would give you this thing. And if you think about it, well, okay, if 2 was a divisor, I would have found 2 already. So you can really start at this. You can stop at the square root of the number. This is the standard rationale, right? So if you have a 2 to the n bit number up to 2 to the n value, you stop at 2 to the n over 2. So there's actually kind of this, you know, there's a square root improvement here, right? By going up the square root. So this is with brute force factoring. Now the problem is brute force factoring, right? I mean, you might be able to check, like, I don't know, 2 to the 60th factors on like a big parallel machine. Like in 1 second, you can check like 1 billion, right? So 2 to the 30th is like, you know, doable more or less immediately. So if I can check 2 to the 60th factors, this means that my number ought to be something like 2 to the 120th. So I'm kind of already a little bit bigger. So 2 to the 120-bit number, I mean, I could check to the 60th, but this is going to be like, this is one of these like months-long projects over the internet with lots of resources to do that. Now, the problem is there's lots of other more efficient ways to do factoring, so we're going to cover elliptic curves, and hopefully by that point I will understand how this elliptic curve factoring business works. So, but their tools were basically you don't have to do this for the homework because I think it is small enough to just try up to square root n and get it. I was able to do the homework that way. Let's see. So GMP ECM, right, is let's see, it'll factor 120-bit number, and it's like pretty much instantaneous. I was pretty impressed by this. Let's see. So here I've got some of them running. Oh, finally factored it. Sweet. So this one just took like an hour, and I factored a 200-bit number. So let's see. So the deal with ECM, you tell it the size of the. This is the number of basically the place to start. So I'm just going to copy that and paste this, and this is just instantaneous. Copy, paste. Okay. So factoring, let's see, factored, and it failed to factor. Why did it fail to factor at that time? Oh, I apparently needed to tack on another 0 or something. This is me not being quite. So it's a 40-digit number. It shouldn't be totally instantaneous. And bam, it said like this 40-digit number is a product of two 30-digit, 20-digit numbers. So hey, right? And here's these two things. And it turns out, so I recorded when I generated these big products where they came from. So this giant 304 thing, this actually came from me running my little prime generator, and it says, yeah, there's the number, right? So it's actually reconstructed those. Are those? Is that visible from back there? Tiny, tiny digits. So the deal is 120-bit number within like a few seconds. It's possible for it to find the find the factor of the 120-digit number, which actually is like, so you think, well, gosh, 120 bits is not enough because factoring is better than the brute force time, right? Better than so if their algorithm is better than brute force, then you need bigger primes, and I mean. Clearly, at some point, you're going to be able to make primes that are so big, you can't factor them, which is great. And this is regardless of factoring improvements, right? So assume we find like a linear time factoring algorithm, right? I claim we can still just make our number big enough that still nobody can factor it. There's one downside. Yeah. So like, I mean, if it's linear time, I'm going to need a number of like, millions of bits or billions of bits or trillions of bits, and say, okay, I need trillions of bits. That's fine. I can do that, right? No problem. Oh wait, I can't. I can't even store the number. I can't send the number across the network. I can't do any computations on the number, right? That it's like, well, shoot. So I mean, you have to hope there's some algorithmic improvement there. And again, we are still, like I say, best known classical machine factoring algorithms are exponential. It's just we're sort of adjusting the scale on the exponential. So we're definitely not in the quadratic. There are quantum factoring algorithms that are quadratic, but nobody has it publicly admitted having any hardware big enough to do interesting. I mean, they can quantum factor like 15. It's not that hard. 3, 5. All right, excellent. So yeah, and the deal is because there is this exponential time, right? So I mean, it might take 10 seconds to do a 128-bit number. If I do like this 180-bit number, this actually finally finished back here. So basically, you input like the size of the field that you're checking over, and if the field's too small, it will not actually find the oh. If it's too big or too small, it won't find it. Interesting. No, it's just finding it all the time now. Okay, so if it's really tiny, apparently it will not find it, but it will not find it really fast. So you can kind of adjust the size of the field you're searching, and then eventually, yeah, okay. That must have been the one I tried. I don't think this thing is randomized, but okay, apparently not. So basically, I increase the size of the field I'm searching, takes longer and longer, and then eventually I either find it or I don't. So you can see, like here, it looked through all these possibilities and then just did not find any factors. So here it should, assuming this thing is, no, apparently did not find it that time. Huh. So I can just check a bigger prime field. I just downloaded ECM, so ECM quadratic factoring. Yeah, and found the factor. So unfortunately, in step 1, if it already finds this, then that's too big. So yeah, so bottom line, right? 120-bit number I can actually totally factor with GMP, few seconds, and hopefully. This thing has to be probabilistic because it's not giving me the same input when I run it several times. So again, 120-bit number, I could factor it pretty darn quick when it worked. 180-bit number, it actually eventually did factor. A 200-bit number right down here finally did, in fact, factor. So it says, and that took a long darn time, 1,000 seconds. So for the last 20 minutes, my laptop that I carried around has been trying to factor these things. So 20 minutes is still not it's not long enough, right? You can keep your secrets for 20 minutes against a laptop, 1 core. Yeah, you're not doing real well. So 200-bit prime, right? And you say, well, gosh, 200 bits. So luckily, the factoring time does go up exponentially. So right, I mean, my primes are in the order of 100 bits each, and my product is on the order of 200 bits. Once you get to like 286 bits, I couldn't really get it to, I mean, it's probably hours, I guess. So this was 20 minutes. So unfortunately, there's 2 different things you have to worry about as far as protecting against factoring, right? One is people running the best known algorithms on the biggest imaginable hardware, right? So the question is, how much hardware could you get? How long would it take? It's got to still be infeasible. The other big problem, and this is a much bigger unknown, how much better are the algorithms going to get? In the 1970s, we weren't doing much better than brute force. So people were thinking like, yeah, 512 bits should be plenty. And it turns out the algorithms have improved substantially. There was a big break where it turns out it doesn't work on prime fields like this, but on Galois fields, where they actually got it. I mean, it was way down. It wasn't quite polynomial, but it was close, right? So this is where they have to speculate. So coming out of NIST, and NIST works closely with the NSA, and presumably knows what tech they're talking about. So they figure, I mean, if you're looking like a symmetric, like a brute forceable key, right? If it's only got 80 bits, that's equivalent to an RSA key of 1024 bits. And if you're using elliptic curves, which we'll talk about in about a month, and that's on the order of 160 bits. This is surprisingly big, right? I mean, a 1024-bit key is, I mean, that's a lot larger than we kind of expected. Right? I can't factor a 128-bit key. But on the other hand, an 80-bit symmetric key is actually pretty dang huge, right? I mean, brute forcing an 80-bit key space is like, that's really big. So Mike and Ben have been working on the hard problems are to essentially brute force on the order of a 48-bit key. And it's surprisingly hard. For the homeworks, you know, I can ask you to brute force a 6-digit hex number, like last one, and that's only a
takes like 5 seconds.
Yeah, 24-bit key. Yeah. So I've got 24-bit symmetric key spaces, and of course there's double the key space e squared at the time. So yeah, 10, 24 bits. I was actually surprised that 256-bit like AES is actually considered, yeah, sure, use 256 bits. And that corresponds to a 15,000-bit product, which is really much bigger than you kind of want, but that's the deal. So there's actually been some criticism of RSA, right, that it's forcing us to use these like kilobyte long, you know, primes, do arithmetic in kilobyte long prime spaces, which is just bigger than you kind of would want to have to deal with. Well, one of the advantages of elliptic curves is that you can shrink these things down. So and then here's the other problem: we don't know how fast factoring has to be. There are people who've tried to, you know, I mean, it'd be nice to have a theorem that says like factoring just takes this long. What is big O for factoring? We don't know. We know big O for different algorithms for factoring, but we don't know if there are better algorithms for factoring out there, and that's kind of frustrating. So it's actually quite possible. I mean, one of two things could happen to RSA. One is that quantum computers, they start building big quantum computers, and if your quantum cell phone can like, yeah, sure, it's got, you know, 10,000 quantum bits, then pretty much, you know, you can almost give up on RSA because it's too fast to be able to factor that stuff. And we'd have to have really implausibly long key lengths. So yeah, so brute force, absolutely a possibility. So the other big one, so we talked a little about this. If you're trying to generate prime numbers, you have to generate them where you can't figure out what they're going to be. And we talked. Did we talk about both of these, or did we talk about only one, or am I hallucinating either of these? So 1996, Netscape browser. It basically just seeded the random generator with the current time. That was kind of considered, yeah, what the heck, why not? And then generated the primes. Now the problem is, if you guess the current time, like looking at the HTTP header, then you could generate those same primes. If you were off by a few seconds, oh man, I have to brute force like 5 different things. That wasn't that hard, right? So if people can guess how you're making the primes, you're in big trouble. So we talked about cryptographic random number sources like dev-urandom, or looking at the hardware. It's actually quite frustrating because, like, you know, a decade later, after this was known as like, oh man, don't do that. 2008, it revealed that OpenSSL, not OpenSSL itself, but the Debian port of it had some code commented out that actually applied the dev-urandom stuff, because it generated a warning when you did Valgrind, reading from uninitialized memory. So they were like, must not be important. That's embarrassing. So it turns out the only entropy left was the PID, and the frustrating part is, like, if you wanted to see if you were generating plausible random values, you generate a couple of plausible random values, you get different process IDs because you run OpenSSL several times, or just because you're looking at the values coming out, and you would get different keys. But then the problem is there's only, like, you know, there were only 32,000 Debian keys, it turns out, which was a big problem. So they've actually done so here's a beautiful way to see if this is happening. I take all of the moduli, right? So a given modulus from one of these things is I have a public key modulus of P times Q. And then somebody else has a different public key modulus, and they're using the same P, and it's times a different Q. If I look at these numbers, it's not real obvious. I mean, you look at the giant strings of digits, what the heck do you got? How could I find P if I give you these two things? I mean, N and N prime differ by a multiple of P. What's an algorithm that can spit out P?
Just divide it by Q.
The trouble is I don't know Q. I don't know either Q.
Oh. So what do you know? You know N?
I know the N's. That's it. And I suspect some of them may share P's.
And you know P?
I don't know P.
Oh, but the ratio would be the same.
Random factors both of them, and then the one that they should have one that's shared.
Well, I could factorize both of them, except that's hard.
Oh, you didn't ask for an easy one.
Turns out there's an easy algorithm for doing this.
Just mod n.
Mod n is actually close, right? What if I look at this one mod this one?
Oh, you'll get the difference.
Well, yeah, I'm gonna. It's gonna be some multiple of p again, but then there may still be some multiples of q in there, so I may have to mod again. Hey, what's I mod you, and then you mod me, and then I mod. Like,
Oh, that's
GCD.
Yeah.
What's p? P is the GCD. So I can just compute GCD of n and n prime, and I'll be dang, that's p. And this actually scales out, right? So if I've got n prime, n double prime, in other words, you just start downloading public keys from the internet, just start sucking them down. And you just divvy them up into two random halves, compute the GCD. If they're all unique primes, GCD is 1, they're relatively prime. If the GCD is not 1, big problem. And now you can narrow down, like, somebody on this side shares a prime with somebody on this side. Is it this half and this half? Right, so they've tried this. And it turns out that on the order of, like, this was one of, I think this is one of the ways that the Debian keys were found. That, like, they're like, all these Debian systems keep sharing this set of, like, 32,000 primes. Where are they coming from? How is this even possible? And it turns out, yeah, it's because there's a bad random number generator. So they've tried this other stuff, and of course the Debian prime generation bug was fixed. But stuff like embedded hardware, you buy a router, the router manufacturer doesn't really get this whole cryptographic pseudo-random business. So they're like, we need random primes. There's a famous XKCD comic, generate random number. Inside the concept functions, it says return 4. The comment says, prepared with fair dice roll. It's really random.
Expecting that.
Yeah, and we're sure that's a good one. So the deal is like you might have these are the company tables of primes, and you choose 2 random primes from the table, and you're like, well, these are the approved primes, right? But the problem is, then occasionally you're going to pick the same prime out of that table, and you'd be fine doing this, except for the fact that people can compute the primes, they can pull it out of here without actually being able to factor these. I mean, if you can pull the prime out, now suddenly you can factor it no problem. But you don't know what the primes are, and then it's a lot harder. Yeah. So this is funny, right? There are fast algorithms for doing exchange. Like it's surprising that GCD is like this, again, 2.5 millennia old algorithm that will compute this, this thing. But we don't know how to actually, split it up into its composite primes. And it's one of those things that sort of makes me a little scared. This whole process. It makes you wonder if there's just some simple, like 4 lines of code, serious, that's all it takes to do quadratic time factoring. Maybe, who knows? On a quantum machine, it's not that hard. So they look, and it turns out like more than 1 in 1,000 keys have some common factor, which is discoverable if you just know this magical GCD algorithm. So yeah, that's frustrating. So generate the primes correctly. Well, we did the whole random number lecture. So other bad ones. The side channel is actually extremely frustrating because I mean all you do when you do if I'm computing exponentiation, so to encrypt, right, or to sign or to compute my the signature of n or to m or to decrypt m, I raise m to the d on n. So the problem, of course, is that how do I do that? Well, if I do that by looking at the bits of D, then the time, the heat, the cache accesses that happen when I see a 1 bit are basically broadcasting to the attacker when, what the bits are of D. So side channel, I don't really know how to plug that one. That's kind of a scary one. Because it's one of these deals where you don't have a whole lot of easy way to plug like the heat. I mean, heat in particular. You can do everything you want in software. You can time it. It takes the exact same number of clock cycles no matter what the input is. And it turns out that it's a different circuit path, and it's going to actually expend a different amount of energy. So if you have like a millidegree accurate temperature measurement, which a lot of cores do now, then potentially somebody could pull it right out. So yeah, I don't know. There are some kind of cool. So we got Montgomery multiplication. So essentially, all this is we do. That's still alive. Yes. So the Montgomery ladder. When I see a 1, I basically multiply the left side and the right side. And so people like try and figure out how do we build, side channel resistant, multipliers, etc. And so the trick is when you do a 1 and you do a 0, you have to do the same work. So when I see a 1, I'm going to be multiplying that data. When I see a 0, I'm going to be multiplying that data. And the trick, right, is that it's just got to be it's got to take the same amount of time. And then I'm side channel resistant. Questions? So right. Yeah. So the other thing, this is in the homework too. It's by default we're totally deterministic. So I see a message M, I raise it to the E power, right? That's the quote unquote encrypted. No one can look at this and figure out what M is. Unless I just say, well, was it 0? Try it. Actually, 0 is a particularly bad one. That's this multiplicative attack. What's the RSA encrypted version of a message of 0? It's always 0. Kind of a whole multiplication process. So you want to make sure you're not encrypting a message of 0. That would be bad. Because then the ciphertext is equal to the message. Uh-oh. That wasn't very good encryption. So how do you do that? There's a million different ways to do this. So they call this message padding for some reason. And padding makes it sound more optional. Like, well, yeah, you might pad. But really, you absolutely have to pad to have any chance of getting having RSA actually work for you. So padding, I mean, OAEP. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce that. Wow. Wow. Yeah. So the trick here is that we're going to be doing a hash. Hashing is important. There's a couple of these. There's actually there's a NIST padding where it's basically I tack on 1 1 and 15 zeros. That's like the start message identifier. That's so if something gets so in the high bits you have a 1 with 15 zeros. So it's just it's a 16-bit number 1. That has to be the first thing in the message. So A, you've just guaranteed the message is not 0 because hey, it's got a 1. B, if somebody is trying a multiplicative attack, that's going to like multiply. So it's like I take a message multiplied by 3 or something. It turns out that's the same as exponentiating 3, and I do the same multiplication. So the deal is that's going to shift this one over into the zeros, and then you can hopefully detect that. So it's basically 1, then the message, and then random crap. So unpredictable stuff. So in this case, the hash function is actually spitting out the unpredictable stuff on XORing to do that. This is let's see. This also lets me sort of I can chew through and I can put longer. I can fill up the rest of the message, right? If I need to try. So the hash will fill up the rest of the message, the rest of the whole data in there with random stuff that's unpredictable unless you know the message. So that's progress. And they do tack in some randomness, and this is just to prevent message enumeration, right? So you want to make sure that's not in there. So yeah, in the homework I do not have anything like that. So message enumeration is a plausible attack on these things. Factoring is a plausible attack on some of the assignments. So definitely trying to figure out what you can apply this to is part of what I'm trying to teach you. I haven't ever actually done any of the official message paddings.
How is this different than like the message block, or like in RC5 we had like the word size?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of unfortunate that, like, if I have a message that consists of zeros, I mean, in theory, like with RSA, I could just like break up the message into a series of, like, n size blocks, and then encrypt each one. But the problem is, if there's a block of zeros, that's going to come out as zeros in the ciphertext, which is really terrible. And that's not, so the classic way to encrypt long messages with RSA is not to do that, because that just doesn't work, right? But break up into subpieces. I mean, you suddenly have lots of attacks, like, multiplicative attacks inside there. You have, if I have binary zeros, that's game over. So typically what you do, and so the other problem with RSA, it's really slow, right? And it's actually far slower than a symmetric algorithm, and it's sort of like potentially less secure. So you might here's the trick to sending long messages. If I'm doing 2040-bit RSA, the first thing I encrypt is a 128-bit symmetric key, and the rest of the message is encrypted with that symmetric key. So if you can decode the symmetric key, then hey, right? And we have like tons of padding, right? So we can put in random numbers to, like, block the actually the symmetric keys. Random numbers, tough to predict anyway, right? Key space enumeration is going to be really hard. You can put lots of authentication data in there, right? So we have like 1,800 bits left over there to send whatever else we want, right? And so message authentication. So that's the standard way to do multiple pieces of a message, is to switch to a different algorithm. And that means you do the expensive RSA operations once, you get the guarantee of like public key, private key stuff out of that, which is cool. But then you're not subject to the limitations of RSA. I mean, RSA is surprisingly like weak, right? That this multiplicative business. I mean, the product of two ciphertexts gives you the product of two messages. Holy cow! I mean, that's not good. Encrypting a zero gives you a zero in the output. That's, gosh, bad news. So it's probably not the ideal thing for just taking like a block of data and then working it through. So this is where stuff like, I mean, you don't need padding for message enumeration, right? You don't need to actually stick in extra data, just because it's harder to do message enumeration with a secret key, because the key is secret. Here the key is public. You've just encrypted with a public key, so anybody can reproduce that computation, which is bad. So that's where you need the extra random numbers. I'm trying to figure out how you reverse this process. Okay. This is kind of like a Feistel structure, if I'm reading this correctly. So I basically take my random numbers, I run them through the hash function, and then that's what basically hides the message data. I take the hidden message data and run it through the hash function, and then that protects the random numbers. Right. So to undo this, you first decrypt this whole block, and now I run the message data just decrypted through the hash function to figure out how to unscramble the random numbers, which tells me how to unscramble the message block, and now I have the message block back. It's exactly Feistel, I guess. So here, it's sort of an asymmetrical Feistel structure, right? So the random numbers are protecting the message. So we just use the random numbers to clean up the message, and then we use the message to hide the random numbers. And then unless you know both of them, then you're good. So you should be more robust against multiplicative attacks. Yeah, that's cool. Does that make sense to anyone else? This is the forward direction. There's the message you're trying to send. There's some random numbers you send to prevent message enumeration. These can both just hash function.
Any hash function? No.
I think pretty much anyone will work. Yeah. I don't know what they recommend for some cryptographic hash functions. Apparently anyone will work. Yeah. So the trick here, somebody sends two messages like this. You're not going to get like the product of the messages. You're going to get the product of gibberish and gibberish, which is not going to decrypt anything. And in particular, like if somebody receives a message like this, they'll know because the zeros will not actually be zeros, right? They'll see that part will end up being some non-zero value, and then you know, man, there's a protocol error here. Somebody, this was not the official sender. So yeah, so bit padding, super important. So bit padding actually saves against multiplicative and message enumeration. Okay, right. So if you look at the ciphers that are actually used, so I'm going to hit net run. Hopefully. Network. So our certificates, for example. So think of all the vulnerabilities, right? That so as we're doing PKCS1, SHA-1 with RSA encryption. So what do we got to worry about here? Well, I'm saying I do RSA encryption. My public key has this modulus. If they can factor this modulus, it's kind of game over for me, right? Anybody that can factor that modulus can reconstruct my private key, right? So I mean, I'm hoping factoring a 2040-bit number, which is pretty small, right? It's not quite small enough to fit on the screen, but it's you know, I can multiply numbers with that modulus in sub-millisecond times. I can raise numbers to a big power, mod that sub-millisecond. So it seems surprising that factoring should be way harder, but as far as we know, it is. So direct factoring attack, totally a known thing. I mean, we hope that's the worst case. Let's see. So other problems. Well, so I'm going to be signing. So here's my certificate signature value. So there's the the signature algorithm is a PKCS1 is the padding scheme. SHA-1 is the hash, and then RSA is encryption. So for example, I've basically signed this by taking that message and raising it to my decryption exponent, and then that's my signature. So there's actually been some worry that like not only do I have the modulus, right, this product of two numbers, but somebody has actually done this exponentiation. Maybe you could combine those somehow. And it turns out, so it turns out there are attacks like this where if you have known plain text, and the attacker can control the plain text, that they can basically say, hey, sign this for me. Hey, now sign this for me, right? Then they can reconstruct the private key, which is bad. But if they can say, hey, sign this for me, and you're just going to happily sign it, it seems like something's broken at that point. The worry is like somebody like Komodo, right? They basically like, you go through, you're just saying, I've registered a really funny domain name, right? Some crazy subdomain.evil.com. The crazy subdomain is designed to basically extract information about Komodo's private key. They do like 100 registrations, and bam, they've just extracted the private key. That would be very bad. They do not want that to happen. So one of the things protecting this in practice is the fact the algorithm uses a SHA-1. So SHA is actually pretty decent against, it's relatively okay against most of these attacks. So for example, I mean, if for this to work, right, they need we need like 2 messages different 1 bit, for example, is apparently one way to get this. So the problem is if this thing is based on a hash, then I have to try enough hashes so I can get 2 hashes different 1 bit. How long does that take? The problem is, well, like SHA-128, SHA-1, right, is you're getting how long is SHA-1? I've totally forgotten. Well, I think it's 160 bits. Yeah. So if it's 160 bits long, I could do something like a birthday attack. We talked about birthday attack during hashes. I think we did. I don't remember. Okay. Here's the deal. If I want two messages, M and M-1, because I have some more sophisticated attack, and these are generated by hashing stuff. So I know the hash A and hash B. The obvious way to do this, right? So I pick a message. My message is like, hello, I'm evil.com. I want a message B with a slightly different hash. So I just keep trying hashes. And it's going to have to be like 2 to the 160th because I have one value that I'm shooting for. right? So the deal is if I have a 160-bit hash, it takes 2 to the 160 tries to land one on the nose, right? That's the hash I'm looking for right there. So you'd think like, gosh, that's a huge number. No way to brute force that. But that's not what you need. So in practice, what you do is you just say, well, I'm going to try all my possible hashes there, and all my possible hashes, right? So I'm going to pick a number. So here's h of c, and here's h of a, h of b. So I try this series of hashes, like I'm writing them down. If it turns out that hash of A is 1 away from hash of Q, awesome. I'm going to use A and Q. Those are my numbers. So the question is, how fast does this table of like matches grow? And it turns out it grows quadratically. Right? Like if I got n numbers here, then I get n squared possible combinations. So the reason it's called the birthday problem is apparently, so what is the chance that a random person like Mike has the same birthday as me? Assuming people are born in times is 1 out of 365. We don't have the same birthday, February 2nd. No, totally different. Because, I mean, what are the chances, right? It's 1 out of 365, right? Extremely low probability. So how many people would you have to have collected together to ensure that nobody shares a birthday? Well, you'd think it'd be like 180 people or something, and guaranteed. But except it's not that I share a birthday with that person, right? It's that any 2 pairs of people share a birthday. And it turns out that like over 30 or something, then it's pretty much guaranteed. It's because so it and it's because the number of combinations of people, right? Every time another person comes in the room, it's not just does he share a birthday with me? No, it's does he share a birthday with me, or him, or him, or him, or her? Right? And there's lots of possibilities, and if any of those possibilities, right, any of them is fine, right? And I don't care what m is. I just need m and m minus 1. So same deal here, right? 160-bit hash, you might think it would take 2 to 160th tries. In fact, it turns out it takes square root of that. It takes 2 to the 80th tries to actually find any relation between these guys, because basically any one of them can have a relation with any other one, and that's a little scary. So there's a known thing with hashes they call the birthday attack, right? Where you just you start making a big list. There's one thing about the birthday attack. I need kind of read-write access to this big matrix. Right, so if I want to tack another hash on here, it has to know about all the other hashes, which is kind of like an all-to-all communication problem, tough to parallelize. Right? It's like random access, or it's not clear how to optimize something like that. Something like hash tables. Like on the cloud, key space search is really easy. Right? Parameter sweep works great, but yeah. So birthday attack. So SHA-1, I mean, 2 to the 80th is probably good enough. That's actually all we do. So I've built a certificate signature value, and this is really just the hash raised to a value. Again, the hash is actually acting as the message padding. PKCS1, I should be able to tell you more about that. What is PKCS1? Apparently the standard.
Yeah. I remember doing this.
Oh.
There's like 12 of them?
There are many PKCS standards. So this sounds like, yeah, okay, it's just RSA. The padding is basically OAEP again. Or do we use something else? This is I guess we want the improved one, presumably. If you're an attacker, you may want the unimproved one. And it doesn't really say which of those it uses. PKCS1 or PKCS 1.5. Maybe it would say 1.5 if it was the... Yeah, so the signatures... Version 1.5. Right. Old signature scheme with appendix. That's surprisingly big. Yeah, so you hash it, of course. Yeah, so the surprising part about this, there are known attacks. They actually, so they showed if you use MD5, which is a pretty thoroughly broken a hash function, then MD5, for example, they know how to generate collisions. Then they showed that they could get one key signed right? And then they would have a different key that says, so you get a key sign saying like, this guy runs evil.com, which is fine because he does run evil.com because he's evil, right? That's the deal. But then you could actually just substitute a second key, right, that has the same hash that says that he runs whitehouse.gov. Now the trick is, you do this by generating lots of possible, so this is sort of the asymmetric version of the birthday project. So I generate lots of possible hash of evil, and then I also generate lots of hashes of good, and I'm just looking for a collision. And if it's a good hash function, this is hard, but if it's a pretty broken hash function, then there are known ways to make this happen. So the trick is, well, how many possible hashes, I mean, hashable, I run evil.com. I run subdomain 37.evil.com. I run subdomain 37.evil.com. Oh, and I'm in, this is my address. So there's lots of places to modify this stuff and actually put in extra garbage. And same deal for good, actually, right? That there's all these fields in the certificate, right, that I have. It says, who am I? Well, okay, I'm controlled name is pretty constant, but the organization, right, the organizational unit, your locality, and then there's tons of options here, and you can actually exploit these options to basically increase your space for hashes. So if you can break the hash function, the RSA has not been broken at all. You haven't factored anything. I mean, this is the usual problem, right? If we're using RSA for a particular task, it's possible to break the implementation of RSA. It's possible to break the downstream code that actually uses it. I mean, there's always ways around these things. Frustrating. So, yeah, I still don't really know what PKCS1. Oh, these are kind of cool. They say like, this guy is not a certificate authority. Don't trust anything he says about being one. Whereas presumably that guy does not have such a restriction. So it's got policies, is a certification authority and has no intermediate certificate authorities. Oh, they don't trust them to go one level further. They didn't get the reseller. Which presumably is why UAF doesn't have its own certificate authority, like sub-income. Because you could imagine, like, every time we have to sign anything, we have to take the public key out to incommon, rather than just having incommon sign a UAF server certificate authority. Sufficiently big organizations usually run their own certificate authority. But presumably, they're more scared of that. They have to make sure that the policies are in place to make sure that actually works. So. Questions? So RSA, what do you think? The steel word, no good? What do you not like about it?
Good for now.
It's good for now.
But 10, 15 years further down the line.
Yeah.
I think with some good thinking, it's going to be better.
Yeah.
I think RSA is good for getting a symmetric key across the network. Because the good thing about RSA is that it's asymmetric, right? So you can you don't have to exchange keys. You send across the shared secret, and then okay.
We don't really have anything. I mean,
the only attack is if you send multiple messages. So if you send one across the network, then hey, you're okay. Or if you send a shared secret, it's binary crap.
Yeah.
And you're okay, right?
I don't know. The thing is, the list of caveats is getting longer and longer with RSA. Mm-hmm. You're fine as long as nobody comes with a fast quantum computer. As long as nobody comes with a fast algorithm for doing factoring on classical computers. As long as your primes have been generated correctly enough that no one is going to be able to refigure out how you generate the primes to basically figure out your primes again. As long as the messages you send are padded correctly such that they do not expose any of the known cryptographic vulnerabilities. As long as there aren't any other unknown cryptographic vulnerabilities that you don't even know about that your messages are in fact vulnerable to. This is one thing about the padding. They keep improving the padding algorithms, because oh crap, we really need to improve the padding algorithm, right? I know there were padding that was totally deterministic, right? And of course, message enumeration should have been an obvious known problem there. Yeah, so there are a long list of sorts of things that RSA is secure if, And it's secure enough that we use it pretty much all the time because I mean, huge advantage of RSA. The algorithm is like, you know, it's not even napkin sized. It's like business card size, right? To decrypt this message, right, raise it to your decryption exponent, mod your public modulus. That's it, right? You can write it in any, actually there's a, it's kind of funny. In the 1990s, there was sort of this war between the cryptographic community and the Clinton administration. Clinton administration wanted to make, so at the time, exporting a cryptographic algorithm was equivalent to exporting like a machine gun or a aircraft carrier. It was the same paperwork, which seemed strange. So if you wanted to like ship Netscape outside the country, like a web browser, right, it would either have to have like really lame encryption, like 40-bit, maximum key length, which is, was known to be inadequate at the time, or you'd have to fill out basically all this paperwork for anyone that was going to get the web browser, which was totally insane, right? It ended up driving a bunch of software development like went to Canada, because Canada didn't have these rules about what you could send out, and eventually the Clinton administration actually caved, right? They said, well, okay, strong crypto, fine, whatever. And one of the big things that made it happen was the fact that, like, in Perl, you can write RSA, right? Like, and RSA was one of these where, like, you can scale the strength however you want. That makes it a munitions-grade crypto algorithm. And you can fit the algorithm in 2 lines. If it was a combination of Perl and BC for the big integer arithmetic. It's not that much. I mean, Python is like 1 line, right? PowMod. And in Java, this was beautiful, actually. In Java, they came up with a totally not crypto library that had one function to like generate a probable prime, right? So like you could construct in about 4 lines of code a fully working RSA implementation, which would then not be able to be exported from the country. But of course, the library itself just, I mean, prime numbers are okay, right? So at some point, the government realized this was untenable, right? That we can't try and keep the crypto algorithm secret because it's too simple, right? But I mean, that was sort of that was the legal battle of the day, and the crypto community won, which is kind of surprising, right? They took on the government and won. So yeah, so strong crypto at this point, I put strong crypto in the lecture notes. I would have to make sure, so under the Clinton administration rules in the 90s, right? That was not that long ago, to me at least. This I don't know what part of this would not be like allowed to leave the country, but it's possible the simple description, like this much, might be too much, right? And there's just not that much there. So yeah. Okay, so RSA, yeah, I have really mixed feelings on RSA. The big advantage is it's extremely, unbelievably simple, built-in libraries for all this stuff. Elliptic curves is the other big thing. Now, unfortunately, we're like a week ahead of the syllabus.
That is unfortunate.
Yeah. So we can like call it quits for a week. I can just repeat the same lectures over and over again. Or we can just jump ahead. So unfortunately, at this point in the, I was going to do some stuff that kind of relies on it being springtime out there, a little more than it is. It's pretty close. So I'm thinking hopefully I can bring the date of some demos up.
Next week's supposed to be in the 20s, and after that it's supposed to drop a little bit again.
Oh, okay. So I'll shoot for next week then. Yeah. So we might as well do elliptic curves. I think we might as well drag that stuff up closer here. So the deal with elliptic curves. Okay. I will probably have to recover some of this. So this is your preview of elliptic curves. Arithmetic mod a big prime. So the big problem with the operation mod a big prime is that multiplication is just, it has sort of too regular a structure. Right? I mean, what do you know about arithmetic mod a prime? It can be unknown. There is a divisor, right? So we have this modular inverse algorithm. It's the extended version of the Euclidean GCD algorithm. So I give you A, I can find B if I know the prime field, which is kind of cool. So I have inverses. Inverses mean that I have perfect, right? I can do kind of arithmetic and keep doing arithmetic and not lose any data, which is always real good. Now the problem is multiplication is really easy to go forward, and it's really easy to go backwards. right? Is I can multiply, and then I can do modular inverse, I can do division. I guess factoring over big prime fields might be kind of hard, but factoring is the whole RSA thing, right? Multiply two numbers, I don't know what they are. If you think about like addition, so A plus B. Addition is really easy, right? That like what's the inverse operation? What's the additive inverse of B? Well, negative B, not that hard, right? So really easy to figure out the inverses. So the trick is, what we want some operation, basically running in a prime field, so A star B, where it's easy to go forward and it's hard to go back. So we've seen some examples of operations like this. So exponentiation, for example, is easy to go forward because I just keep multiplying. But again, that's basically the fundamental operation in RSA. So what we need to build some new and bizarre operation. And it's actually still going to be running in a big prime field. So it turns out for elliptic curves, what they've chosen is, they've chosen an elliptic curve. And they have a process they call point multiplication. So I give you an x, y on the curve, and I can combine it with another point on the curve. And the idea here is that I'm going to come up with some way of defining arithmetic in such a way that it's fairly easy to, like, what this is going to do is it's going to wander around the curve, basically doing repeated operations on this thing. And I'm going to I'm going to be fairly easy to compute this thing forward, although it is actually quite a bit slower. It's slower than doing addition or multiplication, certainly, because it relies on lots of additions and multiplication. But I can do some easy forward operation, and then it's hard, given where I ended up, to know how you got there without basically retracing all the steps, right? So without knowing the secret key. So it's going to be the same exact deal where I basically raise A to its own, to itself. So this is A to the n, except the operation I'm doing is not going to be multiplication. It's going to be this sort of point operation. Yeah. And the trick is these. So the beautiful part of this for crypto, these can be defined mod of prime on the order of 2 to the 256. So this is the top of the top figure here. Sure, we've got so an elliptic curve key, like with a 256-bit elliptic curve key, which is like considered like pretty good. Like, boy, we don't have any good algorithms for fixing it. It's just about double the number of bits in a symmetric key, right? And you can get like pretty dang secure with 512-bit long. ECC tends to be a little bit, so there's a lot more algorithm. You have to pick a curve, which actually has been really contentious lately because nobody trusts the curves that the NSA suggested for us. So that's because, I mean, it's possibly a reasonable thing. So you have to pick a curve. The algorithm is certainly more complicated, so we'll see what the algorithm for doing this point multiplication is next time. But the big advantage of this thing is that, I mean, I have much smaller data. In fact, and especially at the higher strength levels, I mean, this is like a lot of, like, this gets to be, kilobytes of data going across the network for one operation. And then for elliptic curve, then I can send much less data across. The other nice part is that there's no simple, like, I mean, it's again exponentiation, but it's of a much weirder operation, right? And so define some weird number space. And like multiplication of numbers, it's totally robust against. You put in a 0, 0 is either like not on the curve, or it's just a perfectly ordinary point, right? So it turns out to be robust against a lot of the problems that we know of with RSA. If you can factor big numbers, who cares, right? That means nothing to ECC, which is cool. There are some sort of worrying cracks, like they're pretty sure that quantum computers can like just tear through ECC as well, just slight modifications of the same algorithms. So that's kind of a bummer. But who knows? And again, it's not clear how these algorithms scale. You certainly are. I mean, if it turns out factoring is a lot easier than we think, ECC is kind of like the big one left over, the big next one. So we saw like Diffie-Hellman. Diffie-Hellman key exchange is sort of like a more primitive version of RSA, right? That it's basically exponentiation on both sides. I send you a number, you raise it to your secret exponent. You send me a number, I raise it to my secret exponent that I use to make these things, and then we end up with the same number. You can do an elliptic curve variant of that so again, I have a secret number, I turn it to a public number, I send you the public number, you use it to, and it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same rules actually. Right, so so I send you this. There's the public one. You raise it to your private exponent. I do the same thing with your public version of yours, and I raise it to mine. And we're going to end up with the same number because it turns out this multiplication operation is commutative. So you can define elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman, and ECDH that's a pretty common way to do the setup handshaking. And one of these somewhere, oh, totally not encrypted. That's wherever there's net run. So when I do a connection, that's the certificate. I guess I want the connection. ECDHE, so elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key exchange. Right. And that's what I use to set up, and the reason for that is there's less data going across the network. There's actually a lot less sort of known vulnerabilities with elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman. So elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman is so these are just variants of these same things, mostly because the elliptic curve operation is just a variant of multiplication. In fact, it's a little bit frustrating because it's very easy to confuse with actual multiplication. Sometimes you have the elliptic curve point multiplication, and the way you do that is a bunch of these sort of prime field integer multiplications, and sometimes it's hard to figure out what the heck people are talking about there. So Friday we'll get to do elliptic curves, so that'll be fun, and yeah, we might be able to get through that. I might have extra time this semester. It'll be fun. Okay, and let's see. There's homework out Monday. The homework is due. It may take some head scratching to figure out what you're even supposed to do. Mike, was there a lot of head scratching, or Mike has done it?
I'm not sure.
Task person.
I got it done. Like, did I do it right? Who knows?
Well, yeah. So part of the point of these homeworks is that there are actually often several different approaches. I kind of had an approach in mind on the homework. If you choose to do it some other way, that doesn't make it wrong. So it's as long as you can figure out what that secret is, then that's any way you can pull it off is definitely okay. Right. So explicit enumeration of various stuff is totally legit. Explicit, so I mean, all the tools we talked about today, right? Factoring. Basically enumerating messages, just doing a straight decrypt, so all those things are totally good. And there's some creative writing. There's some color text in there too, so hopefully it'll be fun. Okay, any questions? Okay, thanks.
The project, you just want the code?
Thanks.
Yeah, maybe like a little bit, like a comment at the top or something that says what you're doing.
Okay.
Sometimes it's very hard to figure that out. Thanks for calling in.